Hey, Bonnie, thank you so much for joining me on Age Better.
Oh, Barbara, it's great to be here with you.
I loved your book. It is a fantastic book on so
Thank
many
you.
levels. On so many levels. It's such a powerful book. What made you decide to write a book about muscle, on muscle?
Well, as you kind of flicked at it, is there's a little bit of an origin story there with my dad, right? As
Mhm.
a sort of personal through line, as I guess, my muscle guru, you could call him. But to write, I think every book that I write, every topic that I tackle, I want to look at it from this 360-degree view, right? So
Hmm.
examining it not just through the science, but the culture and, even ranging into literature and society. And also, I think because the way I write is to be wide ranging, is to be curious, is to be voracious in hunting down the stories that will best, pull the reader in and examining and looking at something in an unexpected new way. And so with Muscle, it was I wanted to write a book that kind of continued a conversation of the body that I started with Why We Swim, and not necessarily to be, it's not a sequel at all, but it's a companion, right? So with examining what it is to be human in the world, to have a body moving through the world, and muscle is quite literally the stuff that tangibly moves us through the world, but it also has so many layers to unpack. And that's, to me, an irresistible topic.
So let's talk about your father. He's a very important part of this story, of your
Yeah.
story. And so you do write so vividly about him. And he was an artist and
Hmm.
a black belt. So he was very physical.
Hmm.
And you introduce us to him by stating how one of his rituals too, he would walk into the house and then you and your brother would be there and he would say, make a muscle. As he's, I could just picture you as a little girl making
Yeah, we're
that,
just like, okay,
squeezing your
okay.
arms, and then he created what you call and what he called a muscle academy in your
Hmm.
home. So, what was that like, and what did you learn from that, and how did that really inform this book?
I mean, really, from when I was a young age, as far back as I can remember, and we have these pictures, Polaroids of us in diapers, and my dad is posing with us in his swimsuit. My brother and I are a year apart, and so we are both in diapers. He put me, in this like Superman pose next to my father. And when I was growing up, he was a professional artist and a martial artist, and he still is. And he just kind of incorporated us little ones into his whole fitness routine. He'd be practicing karate. He's a black belt. And he would be pulling us along with him in the garage, doing all the kicks, all the punches, working with the speed bag, the heavy bag as we got bigger, running us through jump rope routines, taking us on runs after dinner. I mean, this is like 10 o'clock at night in our neighborhood in Long Island in New York. And just my pediatrician's office was a mile away. And we would chase him to the pediatrician's office where there was this big parking lot. And he would kind of keep shadowboxing and running around the parking lot. And my brother and I would just be, kicking rocks and keeping ourselves busy until he was ready to run home. And then we'd run home with him. And this was something that was very normal in our childhood growing up. And not only that, he also schooled us in art, the anatomy. We studied Michelangelo when I was 12 years old. I remember doing all these projects and all these art projects that he'd give us. And so what I learned from that is an appreciation for the body as a beautiful thing in form, but also in function. And I think function came from practicing sports, right? So from very young, we had to play a sport as well as, be practicing art or doing whatever it was that we were doing in school. And so we started out playing soccer, which we hated because we didn't want to get our shins kicked in. And so we took up swimming. But understanding, I think that the body was important in terms of keeping up strength and ability, even from a young age.
So later in the book, or at some point in the book, then you talk throughout really about your adult relationship
Mm.
with your
Hmm.
father, which you still have, of course, and without giving too much away up
Hmm.
front,
Hmm.
there is a moment in the book, and it struck me, and it actually took my breath away because I was not expecting your
Mm.
revelation, which then shifted the whole dynamic of your relationship with your father. Things
Right.
changed.
Right.
So ebbs and flows for many, many
Yeah, for
years.
sure.
How did that really, how did the shift like shape your understanding of strength?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, I think that all of us have a changing relationship with our parents as we get older, right? So I don't
this
want
was
to
a big shift.
reveal to, well, it is, and I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that my parents separated and that my relationship with my father, which was so close when I was a kid, and you kind of get that sense reading it, changed, right? And he moved far away, and it was trying to figure out how to have a relationship with a parent who is no longer present is, I think a lot of people will know what that feels like. And because, like I said, we all have relationships with our families that change over time, especially as we get older. And so for me, it was grappling with this person who I had been so close with and, in the schooling of self, in these sharing these passions of art and exercise, like who do I become in the world and how do I kind of maintain this relationship with a person who is very much someone who only really exists when they're in front of you. And I think
Yes,
probably
yes.
most of us know people in our lives like that, where they are best in person, right? Face to face. And I think a lot of people learned in COVID how important that is. Like, to have the physical presence of a human in front of you is absolutely different from, even a video chat like we're doing right now. I can kind of make eye contact with you. You can kind of see how my hands are moving, my face is moving. But on the phone, or like sort of asynchronously when we're writing or texting to each other, like it's different, right? And
Yes.
when someone is in front of you bodily, physically, it's, I write about this in the book, but the movement is the message. Like when you observe someone, you're communicating with each other, with your body in ways that are nonverbal. And we are humans who are social creatures. And to be in front of each other is part of the communication, part of that communing, and that cannot be discounted. One of the big things that I write about in the book is that, we as human beings are built to move, and we as social creatures, when we move together, it means something. So there is this added layer of complexity and communication that has to do with physicality and what muscle allows us to do.
But especially as it relates to the relationship between you and your father.
Yeah, for
I mean, you
sure.
even wrote about how, when you are as adults, when you are an adult and you're visiting him, he moved very far away. He moved back to China, where he was from originally. A different part of China, in fact.
Right.
And, and you do reference him as someone who is not a big verbal communicator. He is that kind of physical communicator
Yeah.
with you, and like, a hand on the shoulder, a squeeze of
Right.
the
Or a
shoulder
hug,
to
or let me
convey
show you an
certain.
exercise. Yeah. It's like,
So, like,
this is
make
how
that
we
muscle,
communicate.
and I mean, because
Yeah.
people are different. People communicate
Yes.
with each other in different
Very
ways. Some
much.
are very comfortable being more verbal, but I see that he is not, and that is your love language, if you will, between the two of
Yeah.
you. And to have that distance is really what took my breath away, I think, because I got that
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
reading. And then at that moment when I realized, oh my gosh, he's not physically going to be there. I mean, who knows how often they will get to see each other at
Right.
that distance. So it
Right.
really, really struck me. He really, really
Yeah.
is. And then you also reveal in the book that your own father-in-law is succumbing to ALS, and so he's been losing the use of his muscles and the power he had over his muscles. So you kind of bring that in as an example, and then you also kind of tie that into the story of this wonderful, oh my gosh, this wonderful young man who, there was an accident. Everyone, you'll read the story. There was an accident, and he lost use from the chest of his body, from the chest down, and he, of course, a lot of people would give up. A lot of people would just give up on life if given that sentence, and he didn't, and he showed that there is a different path,
Yes.
and developed this way of doing yoga for people who have severe disabilities like himself. And so I was really struck by that one passage when you're visiting your father-in-law, and you do this one exercise with him, and then you tell your son, say, oh yeah, I'm going to, Grandpa and I are going to go for a walk.
Yes,
Do you want to
yes.
talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Matthew Sanford is that yoga pioneer that we've been talking about. And he had an accident when he was 13, a car accident in which his father and sister were killed, and he was paralyzed from the chest down. And he was told at that time that, in rehab, make your upper body strong and just forget about the rest of your paralyzed body. And he always thought that was didn't feel sit right with him, right? Because like he still saw himself as a whole person, and that it wasn't that his paralyzed body didn't still give him information about how he was feeling. And he would talk about how sometimes if he was sitting in a particular posture, that he would feel like a hum, right? Like this, and that's how he described it. It wasn't that he was having like, miraculous new sensation in his legs, but it just, everything felt aligned. And so, of
Right.
course, with yoga, and certainly with when he started practicing yoga as a young man, it's about alignment. It's about, yoga is Sanskrit for yoking together, right? To yoke. And that's like all of the parts of your body, your breath, your mind, and your body together working as one. It's a synthesis. And so, certain kinds of yoga are about alignment. And he started to practice this yoga and start to understand that poses could, holding a shape, or like a particular stretch could help you to understand how all of your muscles could support using your muscles in service to the whole, is how he talked about it. And how he could get that sensation of wholeness and synthesis with different postures. And he, started working with yoga students of all abilities, and including students who had ALS, as my father-in-law did, and actually he recently passed. But
I'm so sorry.
I mean, it was a very, ALS is one of those terrible
Progressive
conditions, and we had many years with him that we didn't think we were going to have. I think on average from diagnosis it's 3 years, and we had about 7. And so he was able to talk and communicate with us basically until the end. And so I think that that's been, it is a really, for those of us who aren't as familiar with ALS, it's a condition that really takes away your ability to use your muscles, right? So it affects your motor neurons. And so over time, you stop being able to move your body and also to speak and eat and breathe and all of those basic body functions. And so it was this really, existential question for all of us in the family of like, what is that? How do we support this person in our lives to the best of our ability when we know what's coming? And when I met Matthew Sanford, it was at this point in time that, COVID was still happening, and we were able to see my husband's father sometimes, but it was hard. And it was like, we were constantly thinking about how to be there for him and how to help him when and when someone is suffering physically like that, you often feel helpless. You often feel you're afraid of hurting that person. And Matthew taught me that there are things that you can do. And someone who is in a body that is disabled, like people are afraid to touch you. People are afraid to, make it worse. And and he said, you can actually give him relief by showing him some of these poses. And he showed me this it's a movement called, he and his students called the running man. And it's kind of this posture where you move someone's knees who are seated in a chair, and often not patients, but ALS patients, and yoga students adapted yoga students are in a wheelchair, including Matthew. And he said, if you move this movement of pushing on the knees with your body, with your feet connected to the ground, is connecting your muscles to that person's body. And so you can help them to get this sensation of relief in their hips and torso, because it's like akin to walking. And I remember going to visit Jim, my father-in-law, with my family, and I asked him if I could try that with him, and he said, of course. And then Teddy, my younger son, asked me, what are you doing, Mama? And I said, I'm taking a walk with Grandpa, and just, it was that. And it was this, it's such a small thing. And yet if you don't know to do it,
it doesn't get done.
It doesn't get done. Exactly. It doesn't get done.
It won't happen.
And I just remember,
did, and it was a remarkable passage.
Yeah.
And it really resonated with me because, we think when people are in that situation, exactly what you said, we don't want to hurt them. We don't know what to do unless we're given the tools, like
Yes.
Matthew did, the
Yeah.
yoga instructor. What a
Yeah.
remarkable person he is,
He's a
really. And
really,
I'm so happy
really
that you
wonderful
devoted
person.
so much time and attention in your book to him and
Hmm.
to his own practice, because he's doing good work
Yeah, he is.
with what he's
And
doing.
and I really wanted to represent in this book not just people and stories that are perhaps more stereotypically about muscle, right? So there are barbells, there are bodybuilders, there are
We will be getting to one of them
strong people.
soon,
Yeah.
right?
But also the stories that you wouldn't think of. And that
Exactly.
includes Matthew's story and of like what different kinds of bodies are able to do with their muscles. And that is Matthew Sanford's story is in the section on flexibility, because guess what? We all exist on this continuum of ability to disability, and the clarity with which he was able to communicate to me, and also using your muscles in all of these ways that you don't think of in order to get relief, in order to live your life to the best that you can, was really, it was very profound to me.
Yeah, and to me too. And I was reading it. And, I think the timing of your book is so remarkable because there's so much more attention being paid right now to sarcopenia, of course, which
Mm-hmm.
you talk about in your book, bone loss, osteoporosis. I just think so many people, especially on social media, a lot of doctors who are influencers also on social media, are talking about building muscle
Yes.
as crucial. I mean, it's like you have to. It's not something it's not negotiable, right?
Right,
Like Dr.
right.
Von der Wright, of course, always comes to mind. So you're a parent. You and your husband are parents. So do you view strength differently now that you're a parent? And are
That's
you
an
are you
interesting
doing
question.
some of the things that your dad did with you and your brother, with your
That's a,
kids also? I'm
yeah,
curious about
that
that.
is really, I do think that some of the things that we do are our own version of Muscle Academy. And one of the things I think of is burpees.
Oh
so
God.
in,
We
so
all have a love-hate relationship
Oh
with
my gosh,
burpees, right?
yes. And in the pandemic, when it started, my boys were 7 and 9 years old, and we had to do pandemic in the house. So, like everything, on Zoom with school. And at a certain point in time, we started instituting burpees
That is
for
so
minor
funny. That's like
infractions.
torture.
It was, but you know what? They thought it was so funny because they'd seen us doing burpees for exercise, right?
Sure.
Up until then. And when we started making them do them, they were first like shocked and then kind of came to embrace them as like the quote unquote, it's not even punishment because, it would be for something like someone left the front door unlocked or something overnight, or that they were bickering in a very unattractive way. And so we would say, and the penalty or the discipline would be, 10 burpees or 5 burpees.
That's so
And
funny.
it just became something that actually was, it's how, it's how
So
I
like
kind of see,
automatic too, just do 10. Like
yeah,
you
just
didn't
do
even
it.
have to say what, just do
Right.
10.
And it's like a physical and moral discipline in a way. And it's like,
Hmm.
it's about a moral practice. And that's how burpees became a moral practice in our
Yeah.
home. But it is, I think it was that understanding like that it can be about discipline in a way that melds together on different levels, right? How doing something like a physical practice is about understanding day by day that you are different or you're changing or you can get better. And, even
Hmm.
dispensing burpees as a a moral discipline for minor infractions is something that would strengthen their body as well as their mind and
Yeah.
their
Oh,
moral
I think it's a
compass.
great thing. And I think any parents listening out there or grandparents, think about that. Instead of like go to your room,
They are
hey, do
excellent
10
at
burpees
doing
or
burpees now.
whatever. I think that's brilliant. And also, we all know that you have to start early, right?
Yes.
Especially
Yes, you
with bone
do.
health. I mean, this I know with the peak bone mass, when
Hmm.
you hit 28, 30 years old, you're at
Hmm.
your strongest. Your bones
Right.
are at your strongest. I don't know if that's true of muscles, because muscles can,
No, it's
up and
same
go
with
up and down
muscles. You start losing muscle mass related to age in your 30s, and
in your
it's the
30s.
same thing. And
Yep.
people do not think about it in the same way as they think about it with their bone health. They don't think
No,
about losing muscle in the same way they think about age-related bone loss. And I think that is starting to change because of all of these health conversations that we're having. Your doctors are now understanding that this is something that they're telling all their patients, regardless of age and gender, especially because women and older women especially are at a greater risk of losing muscle mass because of menopause, and also
absolutely.
that the cultural messaging has also to date not been as powerful for women to be strength training until now. And I think that that is something that is huge and has changed very much over the last few years, even of my researching and writing this book in this period, that that is the sea change, which is that the messaging, and it's not just the fitness community, right? Like more women of all ages lifting weights and weight training and strength training and being in the gym and doing that and feeling that that is something that they own. It is not just about fitness. It is about the medical community and health messaging, public health messaging
Yes.
for women. That is now something that every woman should be doing because it is so important to aging well. And it's not just about your physical health and guarding against fall risk and all that stuff. It is about your cognitive health. Muscle mass and strength is so much tied to cognitive health as you age, cardiovascular health as you age, everything,
And
all of your
supporting your
systems.
bones.
Yeah.
And the good news is that as you know, you can lose some muscle and then, but it can be built up.
Yes.
It can
Yes.
be. Bone is harder,
Mm-hmm.
is harder, but it can also be built up. Sure, we have
Mm-hmm.
very good medications out there that can help you do that.
Mm-hmm.
But new research only in the last few years is also showing that with the right kinds of heavy lifting, you
Mm-hmm.
actually can build back some bone density. So it's just fascinating. And, I feel one of my biggest jobs and what I do is to get that public
Yes.
message out there,
It's so
especially to my
important.
audience, which is, postmenopausal women,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and about how you can do this and why you want to do this. So in your book, you covered a great deal the sarcopenia and osteoporosis crisis is really how
Mm-hmm.
I view it in
Mm-hmm.
this country and the world. At the same time, you also reveal that your own mother does have advanced
She
osteoporosis.
does. Yeah.
And I hope that she's is taking your advice, as you mentioned in the
She's
book. It's like,
trying
hey,
to.
I know she's
She's
walking
trying.
and everything, but we do need to do a little bit more. Hey, mom,
Yes.
kind of pick up the weights too. And I really hope
Yes.
that she's doing that
Yeah.
and adding in some strength training. But it's not always easy. So and everything you're just saying about for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, menopausal, then postmenopausal, really who want to age well, and that's what the show is all about. Stay
Mm-hmm.
strong and independent, and of course
Right.
healthy. So, do you have any takeaways about any research that you came across that you want to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, the few big messages that I want people to know is that muscle is your friend.
Yeah,
And a lot of people I think, don't feel as
connected to it.
well acquainted with their muscles as maybe they used to be, right? Maybe when they were younger. But it's still something that you can do, and that strong muscles do as much for your, overall mental health, cognitive health, cardiovascular health. We talked about immune health. Like investing in your muscles is investing in your brain.
Yes.
And all of the other systems that your body is so dependent on, because muscle is so influential on your overall health. And I think that's part of what was so fascinating about researching this book, is understanding that muscle is an endocrine tissue, right? So it's not just like the physical, tangible locomotion thing, like moving your skeleton around. It's that it's constantly chatting. It's constantly talking. It's super chatty. And when you move, it's sending all of these messages, these messenger molecules all around your body to your brain to tell it to get, to first of all, have beneficial responses like, creating new neurons and increase synaptic plasticity, right? So learning and memory, it's like your hippocampus actually gets bigger when you exercise. And so just to learn that direct, like that actual process by which, your brain is getting bigger. You're bulking up muscles, bulks up your brain.
Yes.
And the mechanism by which that happens was to me very empowering, right? To know, like, actually this is happening. And so
Yes.
when I lift weights or when I do something physical, I am investing in my brain health. And I think because of the way we think of the hierarchy of things in our body, like a brain over muscles, right? Muscles are dumb, and they're not. They have their own intelligence. And I think that's a very cool, it's just a framework of like how to think of our
It's a
bodies.
shift in how we think about it.
Exactly.
I think
And I
very
think
often
that's
we always thought
empowering.
of like these big, muscly guys,
Right.
always guys,
Yeah.
building
It's a
their
stereotype.
muscles in the gym. And that's kind of the image people have if you say the word muscle.
Right.
But I agree with you. Books like yours I think, are helping to change that narrative and how we view muscle. It's,
Right.
oh my God, it's so critical.
And it's so cool. And that we all have the ability to make those changes because, like you said, muscle is so adaptable. It responds so well
No matter
to,
how old you are.
yeah, to increased work. And I think, a lot of people think about and this is really because of cultural messaging about like, I don't want to bulk up. I don't want to look, a certain way. It's really hard to quote unquote bulk up. Okay. Actually, to build muscle that is anywhere close to what you envision, like in a stereotypical way of like bulking up, quote unquote, you would have to spend all your time doing it in order to make that happen. And so the fears that we have around aesthetics and body image and sort of what is the ideal body, like that, I think really has such an outsized and I think very negative influence on whether or not women will go actually lift weights or do any kind of strength training, because that still is a stigma that is attached to weightlifting and appearances and our ideals of beauty. And that's another thing I would want to shake up as much as possible in our conversation and communicate how important it is to do that, to actually do the strength training for your health, not for your appearance, although you will feel amazing.
Yes.
And
You
look
will
amazing
actually
because
look
of it.
better. I
Yeah.
think that just naturally happens.
Yes.
When you start to get more toned and fit and
Yes.
lean and everything else good that comes out of lifting some weights,
100%.
whether you lift heavy, as some experts would say that we really need to do, or just lift a lot more lighter weights, whatever it is that you choose, you're still helping your muscles. You're still helping to build muscle. I'm just curious, this is connected but a little off topic. Do you believe in taking more protein every day, or not necessarily taking with powder, but
Right.
Eating more protein,
Eating more.
getting more protein into your system every day, as well as creatine to help?
I would say, having talked to quite a few nutrition experts and doctors and trainers and all these people in this line of work, I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a nutritionist, but I do get the sense from having interviewed a lot of people that the current obsession over protein is quite, it's, for most people, it's not an issue. Most people are getting plenty of protein. And unless you are some kind of, performance athlete needing to supply your nutrition for like very extended periods of training, or you have certain goals that you're working towards, you're probably getting enough protein. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't maybe talk to a nutritionist and see what you are doing, because everyone's diet is different. But for the most part, most people are getting enough. And if you do need more, that is something that you should talk to your doctor about. But that I think that's one of the most popular questions that doctors are getting these days.
Absolutely.
Do I need to eat more protein?
Yeah.
But in some ways I think that's okay, because that means people are paying attention to their muscles, I think.
I agree with you. Do you think that with a typical American diet, a way of eating, I think that the challenge is that we tend to really load up protein later in the day.
Yes.
And I think that that's a challenge. I mean, every bit of research I've had, and I've had some experts on the show, really do talk about how it's better, if you can, to front load your protein as best you can. Best to have it throughout the day, quite frankly, like a little at each meal, sure.
Right.
But if you have to choose, kind of front load it a bit more, so you're not running or working on a deficit right up front in the day. So that's one thing. I think that's like a small little shift that some people can do.
I think that's generally a good idea. And also note that, your body can only use and process so much protein. So
Yeah.
like once you hit a certain, it's not like you can like save it for later. So I think it's both about timing and amount. Not, you don't have to have that much of it because you can only use so much of it. But also, on the other hand, is like, don't overthink it too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't overthink
Really,
it.
there are a
Just
lot
like
of
make
other
good
things to worry
choices,
about.
everyone.
Yeah.
And then the creatine thing. I mean, I've started taking creatine, I have to admit, because I did have one of the country's leading experts on creatine in women. She's at the University of North
Mm-hmm.
Carolina.
Yeah.
And Abby Smith Ryan, I don't know if your
Mm-hmm.
paths have crossed, but and she convinced me that, creatine, you should
Yeah.
just like throw in 5 grams of creatine into
Yes.
something every day. It's like, don't even think too much about
I
it.
have started to do that in the last year. I started to take 5 grams of creatine a day
Mm-hmm.
as well. And I would say combined with more focused weight training that I've been doing again in researching this book, I know that's important, and
Yep.
I feel good,
Yep.
and I don't know that it's not that I have noticed some crazy difference, but I have noticed very positive. I would say I feel positive about the changes that I've made in how they support my overall like
Yeah.
functional movement, health,
And it's
and the
interesting how
other things I
creatine
want to do.
works. I mean, people think, oh, if I take creatine, my muscles will get bigger. That's not what it does. It just
No.
helps you to have more, almost, I'm going to use layman terms, more
Yeah.
stamina to
Mm-hmm.
do, lift heavier or
Mm-hmm.
maybe run longer or just do a little bit more, which in turn then will help your muscles to get bigger. So it's
Right.
with the whole, which you do cover in your book, ATP.
Yes.
And anyway, okay, sorry everyone, we're getting down into the nitty gritty
We could
here
talk about a lot of things
because
on
I'm
this
fascinated by it.
interview.
That's why. So, I mean, I think we've all, have kind of determined that I love this book so much on muscle. I just love it. I just love it. Love it, love it. And I'm recommending it to
Thanks,
everybody. And every
Barbara.
chapter was great, but there was one in particular that I really, really loved. And it was about Dr. Jan Todd. And I do want you to talk about her for a minute, but she's iconic, an
She's
iconic
one of my
figure in
favorite
strength
humans.
sports. But what's so funny to me is that another really good friend of mine who's been on the show a few times, Daniel Friedman from the New York Times, she had written an essay about Dr. Jan Todd, and it kind of popped up on my feed just as I was starting this book. And I thought, that's really crazy because in the essay in the New York Times, of course, this book is referenced, and Dr. Jan Todd was the focus of Daniel's essay, and you have a whole chapter devoted to her. So anyway, that's the backstory, but I was so excited to read about Dr. Jan Todd, and I must admit, full disclosure, I did not know about Dr. Todd until I read your book and then Daniel's essay. So tell us about that and what made you decide to focus on Dr. Todd.
That is exactly why I wanted to write about her, because she is a person who has been known in the strength world and the strength community for a long time, right? But she has only started, and at that point she had not really been kind of someone who did not follow these kinds of sports would know about, but she should be. And she was so important to me. First of all, so the backstory is that she was the first real like female power lifter, right? She won the first female powerlifting championships. She was the first woman to lift these Scottish stones of strength known as the Dinnie stones.
That was so amazing.
In the 70s, yes. 733 pounds. My
amazing
friends, all of you.
Amazing how you wrote about it. It was a great story.
And it's so fabulous. And not only was she a person who, she basically was lifting these incredible amounts of weights, and when I say this, lifting not only the rocks, not the stones of strength, but also powerlifting in different weight classes, and was profiled by Sports Illustrated as the world's strongest woman at that time. And she appeared on Johnny Carson. And I mean, I encourage you all to look up this wonderful clip of her on YouTube. It's from the show where she is showing Johnny how to lift this barbell that's loaded with, I think, 400 some odd pounds. And he cannot budge. I just want to see what it feels like. And he tries to just yank it and he cannot even budge it. He just starts hysterical laughing because it is amazing.
Yeah,
it
it's
is
amazing.
Something
it's
that
like it's one of those things you cannot wrap wrap your head
Right.
around
You
it.
can't
You
wrap your
just
head
can't.
around until you actually physically like try to do it and you just think, oh my gosh, that is impossible. So he does it with two other people and she does it alone. And I think it was part of like the joy and wonder of, you know, doing these incredible feats. So she was a person who she is a person who was not only able to do these incredible things, she's also a strength historian, a sports historian, a very respected academic, has written a lot about sports and women's sports, especially because she has been a pioneer in women's sports. You know, she was doing all this stuff before Title IX. And so for me, I said, when I first found out about her, I thought, this is a person I need to be in the book. And, you know, she's the opening, really the opening character in the
Yes,
book.
she is. Yeah.
And I went and I spent time with her. And as I've told her many times, it's like I was so enamored with her story because not only could she tell me what it was like to inhabit a body that could do these things, but she was a person who, as an academic, as a historian, could tell me what it meant to be able to do these things in a time when women could not do them, were not encouraged to do them, and also what has changed over the last 50 years
50
since
years.
she first did them. And a lot has changed. And so it is amazing then also for her to then talk about what that has been like for her to, you know, now, you know, so she went from a person who was the first woman to lift these stones of strength and would actually remain the only woman to do so for about another 30 years.
Yes.
And she is now a person who directs the Arnold Strong Man and Strong Woman contest. And the fact that there is an Arnold Strong Woman contest is because of her.
Yes, because of her. Yeah.
And so not only that she has been so involved on every level and still has been in all of this strength sport development and the evolution, but it's also how she has, through her scholarship, through her examples, shaped how we as women now see fitness, see strength training, see lifting as something that we can do, and that we actually should embrace and own as something that is our own strength, like that's good for us. So yeah, that is a long way around of saying she's amazing.
She's amazing. And after reading that, and also I just love the whole story of how she and her husband, her future husband, met.
Yeah.
And what a big supporter. Yes. And how much of her he was, and he encouraged her and really was just so important to her.
And it was really I love her story too, because it was a little bit of a, there's a mythology around it because it was a little bit like sword in the stone territory, right? You don't know your own strength unless you're given the chance to do it. And she was a person who, you know, she was fast and strong as a kid, but her grandmother would tell her, don't run too fast because you don't want the boys to think that you're faster than they are.
And her dad said, like, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do ballet because your legs will be too muscular. And like, that's crazy when we think about it from this perspective. Mm-hmm. And yet she somehow, her life serendipitously took her to a place and a person who saw that potential in her. And I think that's the great wonder and joy of how her story unfolds. And I don't want to spoil it for you because I do want everyone to read it in the way that it should be read.
No, it's a great story, a wonderful, wonderful chapter. Let's go to another one of my favorites because I am a runner. I'm not running at the moment, as I'm sure that everyone listening in already knows. They've heard too many times at this point. I'm feeling sorry for myself. I had to speed walk a half marathon, but it was fun, actually. I actually enjoyed it. So interesting. But there is another chapter about an indigenous young man, and he ran 50 miles through the desert, but for a very good reason. I mean, there's a backstory as to why he did this that is filled with trauma and just a terrible dark spot on this country. And it's a deep generational trauma. And so anyway, it's a very emotional chapter and filled with some wonderful, warm characters. His family, who really took you in, Bonnie, I have to say, who really took you as part of their family. And it was just so wonderful to kind of look at all of that, the whole history and their experience and how they live as a family and a tribe also through your eyes, through your lens. And so I really do appreciate that. So what did you take away from that story?
Yeah, Koo Stevens is the runner we're talking about. And,
and why did he do the run?
And he, at the time I met him, or at the time that I learned about his story, he was a 17-year-old kid from the Yerington Paiute Reservation in Nevada, and very tiny town. But he is an incredible runner, and so at the time he had become the fastest cross country runner, high school cross country runner in the state of Nevada, and he did all this training on his own, and so obviously was very, very fast, very, very talented, had many dreams of competing, for the University of Oregon, which is, the
Yeah, sure.
iconic Tracktown USA,
Mecca.
Nike, birthplace,
Yep.
Prefontaine, and all of that. And yet there's another thread to his running and purpose to his running. Growing up where he grew up and in the community he grew up in, which was his great grandfather, Frank Quinn, was one of the kids, the native children who were taken from the reservation to these Indian boarding schools, hundreds of which there were across the country and across North America and also in other countries as well, where indigenous children were taken to be quote unquote re-educated, And so imagine basically being kidnapped from your family and
Yeah.
forced to live at these schools at a young age. And his great grandfather was 8 years old the first time he escaped from this boarding school, the Stewart Indian School in Carson City, and ran home. He ran home 50 miles across the desert, and the authorities came back to get him and brought him back, and he escaped and ran home again. And the third time he escaped and ran home, they left him alone, and he was able to live out the rest of his life as this very respected elder in the Yerington Paiute community.
Incredible.
And he never talked about his experience. Everyone knew that it had happened, but it was so traumatic. And this, virtually no Native family is untouched by the legacy of these Indian boarding schools. And it is something that, you're taken away. You are not allowed to speak your language. You're not allowed to see your family. You're not allowed to practice any of the things that are related to your culture, and you're really basically erased. And also a lot of children died at these places.
Yes.
And so
Were abused
and were
and died. Yep.
abused. And when Ku was growing up, he learned about his father told him about his great grandfather when he was around 8 years old. And so he was kind of like, your great grandfather, this is what happened, and you're only 8 years old, but this is something that you should know, because he was old enough to run home and know that he wanted to be with his family and resist this erasure of our people. And so he grew up. So Ku grew up in, practicing a lot of traditions, Paiute traditions, going to different festivals, learning how to dance, sun dance, bear dance, building a sweat lodge, and all of these things, and understanding that running was also a very important cultural legacy in his community, in his native culture. And when he was 17, he also went, at the time when he was really like working on his competitive running, the news had come out from Kamloops in British Columbia about these children's graves, mass graves that were unearthed at that native school, boarding school. And, every time something like this happens, it's like a reopening of the trauma, because it's that, how could we as a country have been doing these things to children? How could we be treating people in this way? And obviously this is a question now that is like more pertinent than ever as we kind of see what's happening in Washington over treatment of all different kinds of people. And he wanted to he wanted to do something healing and about memory and remembrance and history, teaching this history to people and reasserting like we're still here, And so he led this run called the Remembrance Run, kind of retracing his great grandfather's footsteps from Carson City to home. And he had the chance to then, every year it grew. So the third year, which was the last year,
a lot of attention.
It got a lot of attention, national attention, international attention. And the third run, which was to be the last one in this form, because it was like honoring the 3 times that his great grandfather ran, I was able to join that run. And
And by the way, you do say multiple times that running is not your favorite thing
It's not my thing.
throughout
But
the book. It's like,
I
oh, I
wanted to
think at some point you even
understand.
say, did I mention that I don't love running?
It's just
But
that,
you did
I'm a
this. Tell
water
us about
person.
that.
I'm a water person. But I, as a writer, as a journalist, I feel that there is something very important about experiencing a thing with my body, like sensorily, right? And
Hmm.
especially if I'm writing about muscle and the body and movement, what is it like to run in this place? And the point of this run is to feel some sense of what it was like to be this kid running
Yes.
home from a place where he was taken away and wanting so hard to get home that he ran this distance through pretty harsh, really harsh terrain to find his way home to his family and his loved ones. And you cannot do this thing, even part of it, with your body and not understand with your body how difficult it was.
Yeah.
And I get a little bit emotional thinking about it because it was so hard physically, and then to hold in your mind as you're doing it what was undergone by these children, experienced by these children, and also honoring the ones who didn't make it, who
Yeah.
did not make it
Yeah.
home. And so it was very profound, very emotional. And it was
It's an
also about,
emotional chapter. I
yeah, and it
said
was
that up
about
front. It is.
like,
It is.
what does it mean to use your body to understand and to learn? And also in tracing someone's footsteps, it's like, this is kind of echoing back to something we talked about earlier in this interview, but as humans, we're built to move, right? And then as social creatures, moving together means something. And there is no higher level of understanding, I think, this than running an a marathon of sorts through the desert in the company of all these other people as a collective body to honor and remember
Right.
these kids. And it was so amazing. Like, I am forever changed by this experience. I am forever changed by the people I met, and also by Koo Stevens and the Stevens family for inviting everyone who wanted to participate to be on that journey, that learning path,
Yes.
and I just feel like that was just an incredible act of generosity and connection, and that's also what muscle can do.
Yes. And I really do appreciate the fact that the night before, it wasn't your intention to run.
Yeah.
The night before you
Yeah.
decided
Well, I just
exactly
wasn't
what you said. I
sure.
have to do this.
I'm here, and I said maybe I'll walk, a couple of legs like alongside people and interview them as they're doing it, but it just became more and more obvious to me that I had to run
Yeah.
at least part of it. And so the first day I ran 10 miles.
Yeah.
And it is not something that I do normally, but I did it. And then the next day I was just like, oh my God, my legs hurt so much. I'm going to run a couple more legs it was broken down into 5 mile increments, and then, different rest areas that then when everyone caught up to it, then they would pack up and go again. And it was like, again, it was this communal body moving across the desert because no one would get left behind. You could run and walk and do as much as you could, and then the support crews would wait for you, and like everyone goes together. And
Yeah.
that's also another act of like incredible logistics, but also
Yes.
just like, this is not about, like, it's not a race.
Right. No, it didn't
We're doing
seem
it
like a
together.
race. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So then there's double Dutch. Let's go into that. The first time I heard about these incredible women was a story on NPR. It was just like, had NPR tuned in a couple of years ago. And then I heard about this group. So, look, jumping rope is something that we all grew up, or many of us did grow up doing. I know I did. I was raised in Brooklyn. It was definitely a thing to do. But then you revisit this obviously through a very different lens. I mean, jumping and muscles and,
Right.
So what did jumping rope with this historic multi-generational team teach you about the connection between brain, body, and community?
Oh my gosh, the DC retro jumpers are just
Incredible.
amazing. First of all, let me give you a little bit of backstory, which is that they were a group. When they started about 20 years ago, they were a group of middle-aged women who had not jumped for decades themselves, but they had grown up jumping in the streets of DC, like in the neighborhood, like always, like that was what they did all day long, these girls. And Joy Jones, yes, that's her name. She's one of the founders. And she was just like, I don't love exercise, say going to the gym, but I love jumping. I love jumping double Dutch. And so she and a group of other women started jumping together. And then it became really, it just like grew so much bigger than themselves,
Yeah.
where they've taught thousands of people how to jump double dutch in all of these kinds of community events and across schools, and in like they've jumped on the mall in Washington. They
Yeah.
just do all, like the Kennedy Center, all
It's
these
so
things.
joyful.
It's so joyful, and it's not only about the joy of jumping, but it's doing it in community,
Yes.
and also inviting other people into the rope with you.
Yes.
And that their story is part of this larger story in the section of the book on
Which I
action,
loved. I loved about the guy who jumps in the lake.
right, in Lake Michigan, and
Yeah, that's a
the
good
Great
one
Lake
too.
Jumper. But it's also about like what it means. Jumping is such a pure and early movement in human development, and it's, you learn to do it as a kid, but you're doing it because it feels good. You're doing it because it's both to express that you're happy, jumping for joy, but also that when you jump, there is something very instinctive about that movement making you feel levity inside. So Charles Darwin was like, he wrote about this in his books about how this, motion of jumping, this various, purposeless movements like jumping, like we are given to do that across like the animal kingdom when we feel joy is to jump, like
Yes, like jump for
dogs
joy.
and
Sure.
horses and kids and and I write about in the book whales,
Yes.
even whales.
Yes. Amazing.
But really, like, it was about how, with the DC retro jumpers, how jumping into later life is something that we can all do. And, these ladies are now 60s,
Mm-hmm.
getting into their 70s
Mm-hmm.
and still doing it and still teaching everyone to do it with them. And it's about how we can all embrace these things that bring us joy, these movements, these practices and activities, and bring them into our lives in a way that is meaningful and also keeps us going, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I think the community aspect of that is one of the reasons why it's really become so important and has done so well, is that there's a
Mhm.
loneliness factor out there, especially as people
Yeah,
get older. And I think that, and just jumping, you were saying jumping for joy. I mean, when kids, you
it's
see kids
fun.
jumping, and at some point there's an age, and it might be the same age for all of us. I don't know, that we just
Where we
stop.
stop jumping.
Yes, it's no, like you're
Yeah.
embarrassed. People are looking at you. It's a shame, but we should be jumping more. I guess. Well, burpees, you could be jumping a little bit. Getting back
Burpees
to
is not
that,
as fun as jumping double dutch, I'll tell you
for
that much.
sure.
But also that jumping the motion is something that we can and should be doing for as long as we can, because it is both like a gravity, strength training, weight bearing thing.
Yes,
And
it's good for your bones and
it's good
muscles.
for your bones and muscles, and it also is fun. And so there are many, many things that you can do movement wise to kind of like, this is a principle that we can follow as we get older.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So, researching and writing this book, how has so much information, so many stories, you talk to so many people. How has your relationship with your own body changed?
I think I just appreciate it so much more.
Mm-hmm.
I can
Mm-hmm.
look at it from so many different perspectives now and appreciate like how well it's worked for me. I say thank you to it. And I also understand that there is a lot ahead of me and a lot more joy and enjoyment in movement and physical life that I have to look forward to. And I think that that's something that I want people for sure to take away from it.
I know when I was reading your book, it just underscored for me that our bodies are constantly changing. We are
Hmm.
always evolving. I mean,
Hmm.
as human beings, as we're just evolving in all aspects of our lives, but especially our bodies. So, what worked for you 5 years ago, or even a year ago, maybe may not work for you now. And that's one thing. They have to always kind of be looking for new ways to move your body that will benefit you. And that was a,
Yeah, and you
kind of
might
big
be, and
takeaway.
because you are different from day to day, week to week, year to year, and so you might not feel like doing, let's say you're not feeling like running so much anymore
Yeah.
because of certain changes in your body, but you can swim,
They can
or
swim.
you can walk and run. I mean, there's you can do a variation on the rhythm of your running that will help you feel better and healthier as you're doing it. And that's something for me, actually. I used to be able to run for much longer distances, and certainly now my knees feel it, and unpredictably. Like, I think my IT bands just kind of tighten up, and so then my knee is kind of pulled out of alignment.
Yes.
So it could happen at 1 mile, it could happen at 4 miles, it
Yep.
could happen at, I don't know when it's going to happen. So I've learned to, if I am going to run, that seek out maybe a track or some kind of softer surface like trail running,
Yes.
and to vary the tempo, to do running and walking. That has helped a lot. I know that that is a strategy that a lot of trainers and physical, recommend if you're having trouble with your joints, is to kind of try this alternate rhythm of moving. And it does help, and it keeps you doing the thing that you want to be doing for longer.
Yes. Yep. And you write that muscle is the stuff that moves us, right? In every sense of the word. What moved you the most while you were researching and writing on muscle?
I mean, I think I have to say that it's really these people I met.
Yeah.
These people who shared their stories with me, from Jan Todd to Matthew Sanford to the DC Retro Jumpers to
And so many
Stevens,
others. Yep.
and so many
Yep.
others.
And including people in your own family.
Yeah, and it's really the greatest privilege as a writer and journalist to have people trust me to share their stories. And I take that very seriously, and so that always moves me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful book. I think everyone has figured that out, how much I love this book. I can't thank you enough, Bonnie. This was a wonderful conversation. I was really looking forward to it.
Thank you,
after reading
Barbara.
this
Me
book.
too.
And I would love to ask you, do you have 3 top takeaways you really want everyone to remember from this conversation today?
Well, I think I might have already spilled the beans earlier when I was talking about muscle being your friend.
Yeah.
And, maybe you're frenemies lately. But maybe you should be, like, invite them back into your life. Because like I said, muscle has so much influence in our bodies over all of our other parts of our bodies. And I think that is something that philosophically is something that is empowering. And I did understand that as I was writing, that it was very eye-opening to me to learn that, how much muscle is kind of like an unsung hero.
Yes.
In our body. And then finally, it's this sense of being capable of change, that we are all capable of change, the way that muscle is so adaptable and continues to be throughout our lifetimes, and that we can kind of take a cue from that as a character trait, right? That we are all capable of change, and that's a philosophy that I want to live by.
Bonnie, thank you so much. It's an excellent book. I'll hold it up again. On Muscle.
Here, I can show
The
mine
stuff
too.
that moves us and why it let's hold up, and both of us will hold up the books. Everyone, there will be a link to learn more about On Muscle and about Bonnie in the show notes. And I'm going to find that YouTube video also, and I'm going to put that you mentioned about Dr.
Yes,
Jan
about Jan
Todd
Todd.
being on the
Yes.
Johnny Carson show. I think that would really be fun, everyone. I'll put the link for that also in the show notes. So please don't forget to check out the info about the book. I know you're going to love it as much as I did. Bonnie, thank you again. I really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Barbara. Thanks so much.